So we are sat in the constituency office of Mike Freer, MP for Finchley and Golders Green. It used to be the constituency office of one Margaret Thatcher, MP. In fact, the actual room that we're in was her actual office, and I am sat roughly exactly where her desk used to be, and she used to have her eye surgeries. But what is very, very unusual about this room is that it's just burnt out because of the fire that took place here some time ago. Mike, just tell us about why this room is in the state that it's currently in.
Well, on Christmas Eve, I got a call from the alarm company, and it's not the usual false alarm because it quite often goes off. And literally, because I don't like coming to the office on my own at night, so Angela, my husband, came with me, and as we were coming up, we could see something was going on because the streets were cordoned off, and there was, a large number of fire engines and police cars. And so obviously then I discovered that a fire had been set at the back of the building. We had an old shed that we used for storage that had been set alight, and the back of the building was largely in flames. And so I had to basically stand and watch whilst the fire brigade got it under control. And then what was quite clear after, particularly in the morning, is just how much damage there has been. So this room we're in basically melted. We've lost 4 windows. The ceiling in here melted and collapsed. Rachel, who also works in this office, her computer melted, her phone melted. So the level of heat was quite phenomenal.
And people who are watching it can see it, but for people who are listening on the podcast, it's completely gutted. It's in a total state. And indeed, half of this building now still doesn't have electricity when you walk in.
That's right. Because of the heat, the electrics all fused. And some of the heat appears, which is rather odd. I don't know how these things work. But quite a lot of electrics in other rooms that don't appear to be damaged apart from smoke and soot. The electrics are going to have to be replaced because the wiring has melted. So the heat seems to have been quite fierce and has travelled along ducting and then travelled along the wires and has melted. So literally we're running on kind of half power.
And I know what has happened is subject at the moment to a police investigation, so a little bit limited as to what we can say. But it does appear to be that this was an arson attack, and this constituency office was targeted in some way.
We know it's arson. The police and fire brigade were brilliant. They were here in minutes, and the investigation was incredibly rapid. So they've arrested 2 individuals. And they are currently in prison awaiting trial. So we don't know, the police don't believe it is more than just, a random attack. Of course, because of what's gone on in the past, I have to remain sceptical. And of course, they're not talking at the moment. So until the court hearing, until we actually hear from the 2 individuals, until they explain why they did it, we won't know for sure, but clearly at the moment, because we have to be careful what we say, we're waiting to hear what the 2 individuals have to say for themselves.
And so we can't know for absolutely certain whether this is targeted, you say, but it is nonetheless part of your thinking, because you said so, at least to some extent, in terms of the decision you made or you announced yesterday, which is that you're stepping down as an MP, been the MP here since 2010, I think. Yeah. And been in Conservative politics in this area for a lot longer.
33 years.
Yeah, 33 years. You were saying before we started recording that you were on the council even when Margaret Thatcher was still in this room as MP doing her eye surgery. And you're doing that partly because you're scared. You're scared because you have been intimidated by some of the actions that have been made against you, because some of the things you said, and because you actually at one point were afraid that you were going to be killed.
So we don't know why these 2 individuals chose to attack the building. Was it random? Was it because I'm an MP? Or was it because of my views? That we don't know. But I do know that I've had several run-ins with people who have been radicalised. One that nearly cost me my life. One was certainly a threat to my life. So the fire was just really, this is just enough. This is just, the final straw. But also people forget that it isn't just me. It's my husband and my wider family who have to worry. My husband is now since the Ali Habi Ali attack, where he went on to kill David Amess.
And let's just explain that, but just in case people aren't familiar, people will probably remember that obviously Sir David Amess was shamefully, appallingly murdered in his own constituency, Southend, in 2021. And the person who murdered him was in fact, or had in fact suggested, had actually been in this constituency, and the suggestion is that he perhaps wanted to murder you instead.
So when he was arrested, he actually said to the police that he'd, and they knew, obviously, from when they checked, I assume, phone, that he'd been to Finchley and done several recces, and he said on, I think it was the 17th of September 21, that he came to Finchley armed with the intention of harming me. And it was just a stroke of luck that the night before I'd been moved by Boris Johnson from being, a whip to being an ex minister. So instead of being in Finchley, as I would normally be on Friday doing my surgeries, I decided to go into Westminster. And he was seen hanging around across the road. And we've not done walk-ins, and this is Mrs. Thatcher's seat, so we were used to security. So we've never really allowed people to simply walk in and have an appointment. But in between appointments, I just run out the front door to the corner shop, buy a can of Coke, and that's where I think it would have happened.
And do you know, or do we know why it was that Ali wanted to murder you?
All we know from the trial is that clearly David and I were not really of a similar mind on many issues, but on the Middle East, on Iran, on Israel, we were of one. And we think that it's because of our voting record on the Middle East, or on our support for Israel.
Mike, that must have been absolutely terrifying when you found that out.
You do kind of shrug these things off, but it did change. It certainly changed the way we operate. Now if people want a surgery, we ask for proof that they are, if they're not on the electoral register, we want to see that they've got some proof they live in the constituency. My husband Angelo doesn't like me using the tube, so he likes me to drive to and from work because it's door to door. I'm much more conscious now when I park to make sure no one's hanging around. If I do get the tube, Angelo wants to take me to the tube station. He wants to pick me up from the tube station. I pride myself on being accessible. It's a great part of our tradition. But if I'm walking down the street and someone stops me because I'm reasonably well known, immediately now I step back and create a space. I didn't realise it until a while ago, and I suddenly realised I've just spotted that I was instinctively putting distance between myself. I do supermarket surgery like many MPs do. You stand at the supermarket door, people come up and talk to you. Now I've decided to wear a stamp vest. You might have seen as you came to the office, I've got a very old mobile home at the back of the building. That was what I call Parliament on the pavement. I would drive, park on a street corner and let people come and talk to me. Now, if I'm doing that kind of stuff, where I'm literally on the pavement and accessible, I'll wear the stamp vest.
So you've been wearing a stab vest in your own constituency?
Yeah. Not if I'm wandering around, just going my daily business, but if I'm visible on the street doing MP work where people will know I'm there because I'm standing in the supermarket with my pull-up banner, or I'm on the pavement with my mobile advice surgery, which is, I brand it on the day, it's clearly me, then I make sure that I have a stab vest and my staff have stab vests if they want to wear them.
You described all of the changes that you've made in the way you do your work and the way you do your life as a result of the totally understandable fear about the threat to your life. But I suppose in a way I'm interested in just what it does to your psychology. I mean, that's quite a thing to sort of live with. I mean, that's all the practical stuff. But just sort of fear of walking down the street and thinking...
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, it must be exhausting, exactly.
And MPs, we in some ways, with a bit of gallows humour, we try and laugh it off and shrug it off. Oh, yeah, this happened. And unfortunately, lots of my colleagues, these are the big instances. This is not the note left on the car. This is not being shouted at on the tube. This is not being followed around Brent Cross by a man walking behind me shouting, "You're useless, you're useless, you're useless." That level, of, if like, routine abuse, we kind of just soak up. Obviously, we've talked about some of the big incidents that are a bit more life-threatening. But what is quite shocking is, first of all, is the impact on our partners, our spouses, our families. And that bit, I've definitely seen the anxiety levels in Angelo go up. We had a knife incident in Golders Green this week. And immediately it was like, see, I told you, only takes one. And now everything is kind of slightly on edge. What I do feel is slightly worrying, because what's, if like, my decision this week has brought out is lots of colleagues are having problems. Parliament knows that because they're reported, we get security. I think we need to, if you like, publish everything that MPs are going through, all parties, whether it's notes on cars, whether it's graffiti. Let people see what our elected representatives are having put up to. Robust debate is right. Our accessibility is a cornerstone of our democracy. I've got Italian relatives. They cannot believe we go door knocking. You know, they can't believe we sit in a library and let people come and talk to us. That is fundamental, and I want that to change. But people do need to realise there is a big difference between robust debate and threatening behaviour.
You've been an MP, like I say, since 2010, so for quite a long time now. I'm sure you speak to colleagues who've been MPs for even longer. Do you think this is new, this type of sense of sort of routine threats? I mean, we don't have, thank goodness, certainly before 2016, since Joe Cox's murder, we didn't have beyond the IRA, we didn't have a great history of political violence in this country. There does seem to have been one which is, it's not quite a trend yet, but it's worrying that one might develop. Do you think, you and colleagues think this has got worse?
It definitely has got worse. I mean, certainly I think email has made things worse, because you say things in an email that you would not really say to someone's face, or hopefully not. It's quite rare that people will stand in front of you and scream. It happens, but it's relatively rare. But people feel free to completely vent in an email, because it's a safe space, because you're not having to deal with it. Whereas before, you'd either have to do it face to face, or you'd have to write a letter. It's much more effort. Email makes that level of access easier, which is a good thing. But the downside is people feel free to kind of just send stuff. And the other thing is social media, is that there is, so much stuff on there that should not be on there, and it should be taken down faster. You make a complaint to a social media company.
So we're talking about threats of violence, for example, or aggression.
It's just aggression. So I'll give you an example. I've watched the footage of the 7/10 massacres in Israel. I've seen footage and I've seen things I never want to see again. That was a controlled environment. That's available on the internet. If you want to see someone beheaded in real time, you can see it on the internet. That is not acceptable. But when you complain to a social media company about an abusive message, nothing happens. Or it takes forever to get footage taken down. And that has to change, because people can go online and see things that will change their perception. It warps their view on what is acceptable.
Do you think that the measures that the government have taken so far, I'm thinking in particular, for example, the Online Safety Bill now Act, has it gone far enough? Does this need to be revisited?
It's a step in the right direction, and only time will tell whether it has the desired effect, because there is a genuine debate on freedom of speech. I would say there is a freedom. There is a freedom. You're perfectly at liberty to insult me.
You don't go into politics to be popular.
And, you have to build a thick skin. But there's a big difference for just having that disagreement. I don't ask people to like me. I don't ask people to agree with me. But I do expect that we can just have a respectful, robust debate. And I shouldn't feel that my life is threatened. I shouldn't feel that I have to look over my shoulder.
Do you feel that you in particular have been subject to particular threats of aggression or violence, or it's been particularly intense for you or to you because of some of your views? I mean, you've alluded to already, perhaps particularly on Israel. We've seen how intense this debate is in every direction. Do you think that you have been particularly subject to this because of that?
I mean, so obviously, some MPs have had some, equally distressing threats as well. So I'm not alone in that. I've had some serious incidents which perhaps other colleagues have not had. But I don't want to say, it's all about me, because every MP is suffering a level of abuse. But clearly I've had one or two incidents which could have been, life-threatening. But many
such as what?
Well, the Ali Habibi Ali, the Muslims Against Crusades, So when I was first elected, I deliberately didn't just want to sit in my office and say, come to me if you have a problem. I decided I wanted to take my surgeries out and about, which is why I bought the old mobile home. But I decided I would go and do them in the North Finchley Mosque, because I wanted the community to feel that I was accessible to them as well. And so Muslim Games Crusades, the organisers behind them been in and out of prison, very, very unsubtle, had a picture of me on their website saying, and it was on the day I was going to the mosque, saying, you're not welcome in our mosque. This is a no-go area for you. Let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder, which is a very unsubtle way of saying, we stabbed Stephen Timms, or actually it wasn't them, but a radicalised individual did stab Stephen Timms.
This is a Labour MP some years ago. He was stabbed in the stomach. He was stabbed in his surgery
by a radicalised individual. And it's a very unsubtle threat that were coming for you as well. I went to the surgery and I was sat there talking to a constituent, and these blokes burst through, interrupted surgery, sat down in front of me and started abusing me, started threatening me. And so, the mosque management took me into an office for my safety. And so that could easily have turned from being abuse, because they'd made a threat online, could have easily turned to being something more nasty. The next time I did my surgery there, because I wasn't going to be intimidated, and also because my local mosque, this was not them. They were horrified. This was not their community. They were outside demonstrating and abusive. So it could have turned on a dime. It could have been easily that they'd come with a knife and they could have stabbed me as Stephen Timms. So, yeah, several things. But if you look at if you speak to colleagues, particularly women MPs, get it far worse. You talk about, they get threatened with being raped. This is just not acceptable. And even after the fire, I got an email from someone saying, have you ever thought you might be the kind of person that people want to set fire to, or worse to that effect? I mean, who sends that?
Why do you think it is, Mike? Is it that maybe that there's always been a sort of undercurrent of kind of aggression in our society that maybe we just didn't see before? You've already alluded to it. There are more ways to access an MP now. There are more ways for people to tell an MP what they think about them in a way that previously, in previous decades, when Margaret Thatcher was the MP, you'd have to write her a letter, or you'd have to go and talk to her directly. Or is it that actually something has changed in our society that is radicalising people and is changing the way, making them more aggressive than perhaps towards MPs and everybody else than they were before?
I think there's two things. I think certainly social media has been a corrosive influence in terms of giving people the freedom, the license to be aggressive and to attack verbally, which then can deteriorate.
You think that's the sort of gateway to more aggression?
Because people just see things online and think that's acceptable. And also, I think, what you see, you speak to many of my constituents at the moment, they feel, they won't go into central London, or in my Jewish constituents, won't go into central London on a weekend when there's a march on, because they don't feel safe, and because they see people saying things, doing things with impunity. Now, you speak to the police and they say, well, arrests are made at a later date. My constituents want to see arrests made then. They want to see people that, arrested for overstepping the mark. They want to see, people need to see that you can't do these things. At the moment, you seem to be able to do things and get away with it because no one knows if there's an arrest 2 weeks later. And so that's the bit that's changed. People have been given free license to think things, say things and do things without consequence. And I just genuinely, I think, overall within society, there has been a kind of, it's kind of starting to sound like it's a Buffed and Tufton now, but it's like, generally speaking, there's no respect for the institutions of our society.
We're shortly about to go into a general election. It's widely expected that this election, despite the fact that actually you've got two leaders who are, in many ways, they're not aggressive political personalities, we're probably going to end up in a campaign which is widely expected to be quite dirty. There's probably going to be quite a lot of insults on both sides. We've had little glimmers of that so far, particularly on social media itself. The parties, Conservative and Labour, are more aggressive than they would have been able to be in the past when it was just TV advertising and you can get, pretty bold, pretty aggressive kind of social media ads and so on. Do you think that, given what you've just said, that both parties ought to bear that in mind a little bit before they raise the temperature quite so much?
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, in terms of, do you take the moral high ground and you don't get your message across,
Yeah.
or do you kind of have to take the gloves off? It's a fine line. But we all know, we've seen, we saw when David Amess was murdered, we had an amazing debate and everyone was talking about how we need to be kinder to each other. And within hours, you've got front benchers calling other members of the party scum. Yeah. So that's the bit we need to know. It's like no point in saying it in the chamber. You've got to actually do it as well. In fact, I was, watching Kim Ledbetter last night, and it was very telling how she, recited all the incidents. And every time we've talked about this is a turning point, and it never is. And she's absolutely right.
Just one other question before I wrap things up. Do you think there was a lot of conversation, a lot of talk after the murder of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess, that MPs need more security and that we need to think about that question? Is that something, are we at the point? Because we do, as you say, we keep having these turning points and we have that conversation. How many MPs is it going to take who are attacked, or even worse, before we take that idea and that question seriously? Because you have so much security on the parliamentary estate, you're very secure there, but the moment you step out, you don't have anything.
And our offices are secure. My house is secure. Where we're vulnerable is when we are travelling, when we're doing our normal business.
And your staff, of course, who we haven't even talked about.
Well, that's one of the points I wanted to make is, the aggressive emails and the phone calls and people turning up at the door, it's rarely me they get to in the first instance, it's my staff. They're the ones who have to deal with the emails. People need to remember that actually when they're emailing the MP, it's often the staff who see it first, and they shouldn't have to come to work feeling who's going to turn up at the doorstep this week. But in terms of do we need more security, it's a yes and no, because security is just dealing with the symptom. I'm passionate about being accessible. Our surgeries are a fundamental, very special bit of our democracy. I don't want to get to a stage where I have a surgery with a policeman sat in the corner, because it changes the dynamic. I don't want to have close protection, because it changes that whole way of our democracy. But we need to look at how do we plug the gaps. But fundamentally, it's not addressing the cause. Is the cause that people are not being dealt with visibly when they overstep the mark? Is the social media part of the cause? And I don't think just spending more money on stab vests or more cars for MPs is the answer.
Mike, this must be a very odd moment for you, and a very bittersweet is the wrong word, because there's probably not much sweetness to it, but it must be a very elicit complicated emotions. You've said you're standing down. You're standing down in very particular circumstances. That's probably a relief, and it's probably a relief, particularly to your husband, who you've mentioned. But to feel that at least this is at least a backdrop to all of that, a sort of threat of political violence, it's disturbing, isn't it? And you must have really wrestled with it.
It's very sad. It's the most amazing job in the world, and this is a constituency full of most wonderful people. And that's the real emotional wrench, is actually walking away from people that we have spent nearly 14 years getting to know each other and doing so much good. That's the bit that is really sad and emotional. And I don't like the word forced out, because it's my decision to walk away. But it is sad that it's a job that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I'm giving it up because I'm never sure that, who's lurking around the corner. I'm not prepared to keep putting my husband and family through that anxiety of, where are you? Are you coming home? Will you come home? Is always at the back of the mind. That's just not fair.
Mike, thanks so much for letting us into your office and having a chat with us today.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.